On today's podcast, I speak with Rev Ronnie Roll. She's the co-owner of Basswood Chalet and Guesthouse. We spoke about her interfaith ministry and the differences between that and a non-denominational minister. I hope you enjoy this podcast. I'd like to welcome Ronnie Roll to the podcast.
Good morning. How are you?
I'm doing good. How are you doing?
Doing great.
All right. So just jumping right into it, I'd like to know a little bit about your background and what got you into the wedding industry.
Well, I have one of those unique stories in that my calling was defined by one of those incredible moments. I was in sales and marketing, and I was a trainer and motivational speaker most of my grown life. And one morning in 1999, I literally was struck by lightning inside my house. And I was one of the lucky ones who was able to walk away from that experience. But shortly after that, there were a series of visions and moments of incredible clarity that I knew what I needed to do and when and in what order. And I literally had a vision one night of myself getting ordained and seeing myself walking up the aisle as this was all transpiring. But I didn't share it with anybody. And shortly after that, I had some friends who were the kind that do have those kinds of visions and clarities. And they would come up to me and they said, you know, I had this dream the other night that you got ordained. And when I came to tell you, it wasn't a surprise to you. You already knew. And so that kind of gave me that validation that my visions were real. And so at that point, I just started down that path. And when I got ordained, I didn't ever think it was going to be to actually do what a real minister does. I thought that it was really just about me and my own personal spiritual journey. So when I got ordained, it was like, oh, okay, well, this is cool. This is what I'm supposed to do. And maybe it's about helping other people to come together, because I'm all about the love. I'm all about helping people to have better relationships and to get along with each other. And it wasn't until people started finding out that I was fully ordained and that I'd been through seminary and a 3.5-hour ceremony with oil being sealed on my forehead that they started saying, hey, would you marry us? And can you spiritually bless our union? And it just kind of grew from there. So that's how I ended up getting into the wedding industry.
Wow, that sounds crazy on how it started. What were you doing in your home that you got struck by lightning? Like plugging in a electronic appliance, or just kind of standing, or?
Well, here's the fun part. I've often said that God tries to catch me in the most vulnerable spaces. And that morning, I was totally naked, pulling my clothes out of the dryer. And I was holding the dryer open with my knees because of its proximity to the washing machine. Uh-huh. And this bolt of lightning came down and it hit the dryer vent on the outside of the house. Oh my. And there's, of course, just one little metal coil that comes through the dryer vent, through the coil in the back and up into the dryer. But there was enough electricity in that bolt of lightning anyway that it fried not just me, but 2 telephones and a computer in different parts of the house at the same time.
Wow. That's crazy.
Yeah.
Wow, that is really crazy. I'm glad that you're okay.
Yeah, it's left me with a skipped heartbeat. Oh, but wow. Using meditation now, I'm able to get that under control if it gets out of rhythm. So
wow. So you also own the Basswood Chalet and Guesthouse. Talk to me a little bit about that. Was that part of your revelation as well, or is that just something that you've come to, further your business in the wedding industry?
Well, I think that God leads us into areas that make sense, and a lot of times will give us a vision of what's possible and open maybe several doors, and we get to choose which door we want to walk through. And a couple of years ago, my husband and I lost our home in a flood.
Oh,
Yes,
geez.
go figure. I have to be careful with nature, don't you think?
I guess.
And after that, we were very blessed that the state, county, and FEMA decided that they didn't want us rebuilding on that property, but they were willing to purchase it from us. And so it took 2 years. And when we finally closed on that, then this particular property that is Basswood Chalet and Guesthouse presented itself. And my husband is a professional photographer and videographer who's also shot hundreds of weddings. And so when he and I saw this property, the chalet has a 25-foot river rock fireplace in it. And it's this beautiful, warm piece of property with tons and tons of trees and a lake across the road. And it just looked like the perfect place for a warm, intimate kind of ceremony. And it has a guest house on it as well. And so when we started looking at what I bring to the table for a couple, being a mediator, an arbitrator, having a graduate level certification in conflict resolution, it presents itself in a way that it's the perfect location for us to be working with people who are either starting their relationships or looking at making them better, more intimate, or are challenged right now and really want to find their way back to each other. So we can do all of this work here at Basswood Chalet and Guesthouse. And so it's been a blessing for us to find it.
What are some of the what's the process that you use when you work with the couples that come to either renew or start their marriage?
It's changed a lot thanks to us having media and the whole internet. It used to be that, of course, if a couple were to be working with a minister, that there would be a requirement for them to get together physically for several months leading up to this particular event. But now things have changed. And so I can work with a couple that's virtually anywhere or has very difficult schedules. So some of my couples, for instance, the groom is one that travels a lot for his living. And so he may not be readily available. So it's really for me about being able to use that internet or other forms of media to be able to have us connecting. So we usually start by talking either in person or through some sort of video chat. Sure, and then if they want to do some sort of premarital education, we figure out how we can do the same thing through video conferencing, a mixture of in-person and video conferencing, whatever really works for them.
So after you go through that process and you marry them, is that the end of the relationship with your clients, or do you do follow-ups? How is that really told to them, after the wedding?
Well, it starts in that I'm the one that is filing the paperwork saying that their marriage is now legal with a governmental entity. And then I personally choose to follow up with an email to the couple, letting them know that it's been taken care of and what the process looks like for them to start getting certified copies of their marriage license. And then also talking with them about tips and tricks for them to keep their marriage healthy, because that's ultimately what I want. I don't want a repeat and referral client because I'm marrying them to somebody else. What I want is, I want to work with them long term. So after that, let's keep the relationship healthy. Come stay at Basswood Chalet and Guesthouse for a weekend and just have fun. Or they're having children. They want the babies baptized or do blessings. Maybe they buy a new home. I can bless the home. And then it's really about carrying them through all of life's milestones. So they may, in fact, and this has happened to me, I married a bride and groom, and then a week later got a phone call that there was a funeral in the family, and was I capable of being able to handle that for them? And of course, the answer was yes. And so it's pulling them through all of these kinds of things that happen in life. And vow renewals. You're so happy together in 5 years and 10 years, or something has happened dramatically that's helped you to reconnect in a deep way, and you want to be able to say that again. So we can do those kinds of things with a couple as well.
So what are some of the requirements in Wisconsin to officiate a wedding? And what are they like in the other states? Do you have any experience with other states, or is it just mainly Wisconsin?
I do have experience in other states. Here in Wisconsin, we have a statute that lays out what the exact requirements are. And I am not a judge nor an attorney, so I can't offer legal advice. What I can do is share with you that here in Wisconsin, there is a provision that someone does not have to go through seminary as a postgraduate program in order to officiate a ceremony. And what can happen is if a couple has a family member, say, for instance, that they would like to honor by having that person marry them, there is a way that can happen. And so it is a possibility. We also have judges that can do it. If you go to the courthouse, usually there are attorneys that will marry a couple for free. So that's a possibility. And so there are all of these opportunities leading all the way up to and including, of course, someone that has spent years in school learning how to do this and to learn how to actually make it not just something that is legally binding, but is also spiritually binding and reflects what it is the couple really wants to say rather than necessarily reading something out of just a book.
Yes, of course. That sounds great. So you're an interfaith minister, Reverend. Can you explain to me what that really does mean, and how is it different from a non-denominational minister? I don't have much of a background in religion myself. I was raised Catholic, but I'm not, I guess, non-practicing Catholic at this point. So if you could just explain what the difference are, that would be great.
Wonderful. And Scott, that's a great question to ask because I do get that one frequently. And the difference is that when I was going through my undergrad degree and also in seminary, it was important to me not just to study one particular kind of Christianity. And when a lot of ministers are being ordained through the traditional long form way of doing it, that's really what they do, is they spend the majority of their education and their training studying underneath just one form. So that means that, for instance, they might be studying only the Episcopalian path or only the Catholic path or the Methodist path. And as an interfaith student and then an interfaith minister, in order for me to become ordained, I had to study not just all those different forms of Christianity, but also Judaism, Hinduism, Buddhism, Native American spirituality, Church of Scientology, indigenous faiths and Wicca, paganism, Creole faiths. It was all of these different world religions, because in order for me to work with people from all walks of life, I needed to understand where they were walking. And that also includes those that consider themselves to be either atheist or agnostic. And the bigger share of people right now, which is about 80% of the population, identifies as being spiritual but not religious. Mm-hmm. And so they find themselves having a faith, a belief, but not necessarily tied to any particular church, temple, or synagogue that they have to go to. And so I support people in whatever their individual spiritual journey is, into helping them along that path, non-judgmentally. It's not up to me to say anybody is right or wrong. After all, I'm doing my own spiritual journey just as much as everyone else.
Yes, of course. Yes. Yeah, that's how I always looked at religion myself as well. It's not the building or the person that stands in front of the altar that makes the spiritual journey. It's the actual person that's walking it itself. So about how far out do you book in advance for your venue and for your services?
Well, this is the fun part, because as a venue owner now, I look at the research, and the research is that most couples find their venue first. Then they start down the list of all of the other vendors that they're going to use. And the last one they usually go looking for is the officiant.
I find it the last person they look for is the videographer, cinematographer.
Usually they're looking for their photographer and videographer simultaneously.
Yes. Yeah.
Thinking the same person can do both.
Sometimes, but not often.
Yeah. Yeah. And so for me, I wear both hats. And as a minister, I kind of laugh about this, because I think, I can marry you in your car, in a bathroom, anywhere, but you can't necessarily get married without me. And yet I'm the last thought.
Yeah,
so
that makes,
that's here in Wisconsin.
I see a lot of posts in the Facebook groups asking for officiants, and it's the approach in marriage is a little bit different nowadays from what it was previously, and it not necessarily saying it's bad. It's just it's interesting approach that I've seen.
Yeah, I agree. And, in other states, it can't be the way it is here in Wisconsin. In other states, for instance, if you just cross the border and you go into Minnesota, in order to become an officiant, you have to register your credentials in the county that you're going to be performing the ceremony. And couples who are interested in receiving a discount towards the price of their wedding certificate over there need to take premarital education, and that takes some time to accomplish. So they need to get hooked up with somebody who's qualified to do that kind of work with them in advance. They can't wait to the last minute. But those posts that you do see on Facebook are from couples who may have asked a family friend or a family member to perform a ceremony, and maybe that person has gotten cold feet at the last minute. Or
a lot of people back out,
or has decided, you know what, honey, I really appreciate that you've asked me to do this, but I just want to enjoy your day, and I can't do that if I'm so worried about everything that's got to happen. Or I don't know what I'm doing. I can read something that I can download off the internet, but I have no clue how to run a wedding rehearsal. And so can you find somebody else?
So you bring up their wedding rehearsal. What is your process for that? Like, I've been to a number of them, and they seem pretty relaxed. Do you walk through the entire ceremony? How do you handle that?
Well, for me, I really take some of the cues off of my bride and what's going on, because you can have a wide variation of family members and friends who are there or not there. Sometimes I get members of the bridal party who are coming from out of state, and so they can't be there that night before. So it really depends on who's there. But usually in advance, I've had an opportunity to talk with the bride and groom. I know who is going to be there. I have already worked with them to talk about who's going to be pairing up with whom, walking down the aisle, those kinds of things. Do they have ushers? What responsibilities do they want to give to the ushers? So that when it comes time to actually be there, yes, it is kind of informal, but we need to get through some pretty serious things. And so the first thing I always ask is that those who are there for the rehearsal be sober.
Yeah, that's a good requirement, I would say.
It is. It really saves us from having to go through this again the day of the ceremony. And so we start out that way. And it's not that I do the entire ceremony word for word, but what I do like to do is have everybody line up and learn the pacing with what music is going to be there, talk about some of the things that they can expect to happen, like there is going to be a photographer or there is going to be a videographer. And so make sure that you stop at the back of the aisle so that they can get that shot of each couple before they come forward, and communicate those kinds of things so that everybody knows what the expectations are. If there's going to be something that's going to be different than what they may have seen in a different kind of wedding, because not everyone knows that maybe the bride or groom has a different spiritual belief. And so they may not know what a hand fasting is, or they may not know what jumping over the broom is done for. So we cover those things.
Awesome. So you bring up the photographer, videographer. Is there any requirements that you have personally for them? Like a lot of Catholic churches don't allow flash during the ceremony. Anything that would be helpful for you to express to others that may be listening, some things that you find that would be distractful to the ceremony. I know I like to walk up and down the center aisle. I try to stay away, as far back as possible, but anything that you've seen or come across that you would like to change or you think could be done better?
I'm probably one of the most relaxed ministers you'd ever work with, Scott. and if anything, I'm very concerned about photographers and videographers being able to capture the moment for my couple. And one of the challenges that we all see right now are the number of family members and friends who want to capture those images themselves and get them out into social media ASAP. And I really, really implore these people to please put away your cell phones, your own personal cameras, keep your arms out of the main aisles so that your friends and your loved ones get those images that they want to have of their most beautiful day. And so for me, what I do with my couples now when we start talking in advance is I bring this up. Will you give me permission to make an announcement before we get going with the ceremony that everybody put away their cameras, put away their cell phones, and be fully present in the moment until after I announce them as husband and wife? At that point, all the shutters that need to get cooking and the flashes, go for it. And then I step out of the way so that even the photographer can capture that first kiss without the officiant standing behind them.
Yes.
So it's those kinds of things to just really everybody give the couple the day that they really want to have.
An unplugged ceremony is great. I love that. There's nothing like someone with a big iPad standing in the middle of the aisle trying to get that picture of the first kiss when the professional is actually trying to get the same shot. So that's definitely, I'm glad you touched on that. That's a great point.
And I even find for my couples that put the sign in the back that says our wedding is unplugged, put all of it, that doesn't get read.
No, it doesn't. And sometimes they don't even listen to when the officiate says it as well. So
I actually had one ceremony where that was the case. I made the announcement before we had the processional, and they were still snapping away. And before I even continued that ceremony, I said it again and looked that person straight in the face. So I'm not afraid.
Do you usually notify the guests to sit down after the bride walks down the aisle?
Oh, of course.
Yes.
Of course.
I've had a couple this past year where you could tell that, they weren't, they didn't do many weddings, and they forgot to tell all the guests to sit down. So everyone is still standing, and they continued to stand, and they stood all the way through the ceremony. And I was trying to walk around telling everybody to sit down, and a couple people actually sat down, and, but as a photographer and doing video, you're trying to get that uniform shot of everyone either sitting down or standing up. And there was like a couple people popping up, and it just looked a little different. So I had a conversation with the officiant beforehand, because it happened to me three or 4 weeks prior, the same thing where everybody stood up. I said, please make an announcement, have everybody sit down once they come in, so we can avoid that. And they must have got caught up in everything, and they forgot. And I was trying to make that eye contact with them to get them to sit down, but no one was listening. So that's one thing I always bring up as well when I'm working with somebody that way.
Yeah, and that really is one of those unfortunate differences between somebody that has the education and the training going in. And it's the reason why a couple will choose to go for somebody who has that experience and training, as opposed to necessarily just someone who is a family friend, because there are those little differences that do pop up. And that's a perfect example of it. And one of the things I do with my couples is, before I am going to be performing any ceremony for them, I've written my ceremonies. And so I send them to my couples in advance, so they have an opportunity to read through the ceremony. They know what's going to be transpiring. And something like that is obviously written in, not just so that it happens, but also because when we're up there, emotions run high. And it's quite possible that I may be getting caught up in consoling a groom, for instance, and may not necessarily think in my head either about that. So the fact that I have it written down in my book that I'm going to be using to guide me through their ceremony also keeps me on track.
Yeah, it's definitely it was definitely them getting caught up in the moment. That's what I noticed, because I couldn't even grab their attention, and me and the photographer were trying to grab their attention, and we kind of walked around and just had everybody sit down as best we could. It was definitely an experience a couple of times. So go ahead.
One of the things that I like to do when I'm talking with my clients in doing that first initial interview, where they're interviewing me, but I'm also interviewing them as well to see whether or not we're a good fit, is to ask who the videographer or photographer, or who their music providers, if there's a wedding planner, who are the other vendors involved, because many of us that work in the industry on a regular basis know each other. And so I have this aha moment sometimes when a couple says, oh yes, well, I've hired this person as the DJ or this person as the photographer. I can breathe a sigh of relief, because I know who they are. I know how professional they are. And I know that we can work together. And usually I'm arriving about a half hour to 45 minutes before a ceremony. And I go over and we talk together, and I go, okay, these are the cues through the ceremony to watch for. These are the words that I'm going to say before you kick in the music, or this is what the photographer is telling me he needs and when he needs it. I'm letting him know, if I haven't worked with him before, or her, that the couples will be stopping in the back of the aisle, or that this is going to be transpiring, or that I also have a decorative wedding certificate that I have available for the witnesses to sign, that I give to my marital couple. And it's a lot prettier than the paperwork that has to get signed and turned in. So it gives the photographer another one of those shots that they can offer a bride and groom. Yes, so we go through those kinds of things.
It all comes down to communication. That's like the biggest theme that I've been touching on through all these podcasts that I've been doing is communicate with all the vendors, everyone on a wedding day, communicating with the bride, the groom, the entire wedding party, mom, dad, whoever.
And that's an interesting thing to bring up, because nowadays there are a lot of times that couples have never been married before. They don't know what the expectations are. They hope that parents can be guiding them through this, but things have changed so much since maybe your parents got married. And so these are the places where, for instance, a wedding planner could be guiding. Or don't be afraid to ask the question of your vendor. One of the questions that I like to bring up with couples a lot of times is, what are the expectations that you have about whether or not, say, for instance, you're going to be feeding your vendors? Because your vendors are people too, and many of them have families at home, and their families have asked them that morning before they left, honey, will you be home for dinner? And if you've not covered this in advance with your vendors don't necessarily know what to tell their spouse. And so bring this up. And so as you're going through that with your vendors and you're interviewing them, talk to them, communicate, say, we plan on having meal there. It's going to be served buffet style, and we want to invite you to jump in and feel like you can partake. If you feel comfortable with having your minister's spouse come, or your photographer's spouse come, or your musicians having their spouses there, and including them in the reception, mention that. Other ways that you can do that is feel free to send an invitation and ask for an RSVP back. And that's another way that you can have that communication, but do bring it up. And quite honestly, if you don't feel that that's something you want to do, be upfront about that too. As a vendor, I don't care. It's really up to you, but do communicate with us about the expectation.
Yes, I always ask that a meal be provided because we are there all day long, 12 plus hours. So having a vendor meal is always a great bonus for the day. We sit down with all the guests and just to take like a quick break, regroup. We usually are working all the way through the meal with doing, video and photo, but that's great information. So, but as we are wrapping up here, Ronnie, what is the best way our listeners can get in touch with you?
Well, there's several ways that you can do that. I am on Facebook a lot, so that's usually the number one way to get me is at Rev Ronnie Roll, Interfaith Minister. The next way would be through my website, and that's revronnie.net. And then the third would be by telephone. Just pick up the phone and call. Imagine that. 715-967-2488.
Okay, perfect.
Thank you so much, Scott.
Yeah, and I'd like to thank you for joining me as well. You have a great day.